Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're looking at my top 5 key tips for weight loss, with some extra bonus tips at the end. Now, in this channel we like to keep everything evidence-based, so all these tips can be backed up with scientific evidence. Now let's get into it. Now, we know that mainstream dietary advice says that in order to lose weight, you need to burn more calories than you consume. And of course this works. If you starve yourself or run a marathon, you're likely to lose some weight. But this is also massively oversimplified, and I'll tell you why. The calories in versus calories out model ignores the different effects that different foods can have on the body. Calories in versus calories out is basically a simple physics model of the body being applied to a complex biological system, where calories are a measure of the energy that you get if you set fire to the food. The way a calorie is measured is to place the food in something called a bomb calorimeter, and then simply to set fire to it. And then you measure how much energy you get out. But the human body is much more complicated than this, and doesn't just set fire to the food. So the actual composition of what we eat matters, and not just the energy. And we can see this quite clearly in experiments on mice, where mice fed diets that were completely identical in calories gained different amounts of weight depending on what exactly they were fed. And with the same amount of calories, one diet could make the mice lean and healthy, and the other diet make the mice fat and unhealthy. So there's clearly more to the picture. We also know that the number of people who are overweight or obese has been steadily increasing for the past century. In the early 1900s, being overweight or obese was rare. Changes in genetics happen over very long timescales of hundreds of thousands or millions of years. And so as this change in body fat has happened relatively fast over the past 100 years, we cannot blame bad genetics for gaining weight. And in tribes living a traditional lifestyle and eating their traditional diet, being overweight or obese was also extremely rare. But as in a 2022 systematic review article examines, those tribe members who transitioned to a Western diet and lifestyle then started to gain body fat and suffer from the same health problems as we see in westernized countries. And so clearly there are some factors about the modern Western diet and lifestyle that is driving this increase in body fat. And this means that if we can find and address these factors, then we can lose weight, and we can lose weight potentially without heavily restricting calories. And this is important, as calorie-restricted diets are hard to follow and stick with. If you're constantly significantly restricting your calories, then you're going to be hungry and tired, and you're not going to be at your best. And you're probably not going to stick with the diet long term. Okay, so how can we lose body fat without a harsh calorie-restricted diet, and without the constant hunger and fatigue that comes with it? What diet and lifestyle changes can we make that will allow us to lose fat and improve our body composition while still feeling satiated? Okay, this brings me on to my first weight loss tip. And I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by this one being on the list. And so at number 5, we have exercise. Now, we all know that exercise is good for us and can help us burn fat, gain muscle, or both. But there is, of course, different types of exercise, so which is best? Now, generally, you can categorize exercise based on how intense it is, and you can have endurance exercises that can be low intensity like walking, moderate intensity exercise like jogging, and higher intensity exercise like high intensity interval training. And you can also have resistance training that is generally very high intensity for short periods of time with breaks in between, and is the best way of building muscle by progressive loading, as you can increase the resistance as you get stronger. One interventional study compared low intensity exercise, equivalent to walking, with moderate intensity exercise like jogging. The participants chosen were middle-aged, overweight, and sedentary. They split the participants up into 4 groups, including a control group that did no extra exercise. One group that did equivalent to 12 miles of walking per week, a second group that did 12 miles of jogging per week, and a third group that did 20 miles of jogging per week. For context, 12 miles per week is roughly 30 minutes of brisk walking per day. Now, the control group gained about 1 kilogram over the 8-month period of the study. Both the walking and jogging group that did 12 miles per week lost a very small amount of weight, only about 600 grams, across the 8 months, with no significant change in their body fat. And the group that did 20 miles of jogging per week had a larger weight reduction of 2.3 kilos. Okay, so both low intensity and moderate intensity exercise seems to work similarly for weight loss, with more exercise leading to more weight loss for both, which is not particularly surprising. Although the amount of weight lost over 8 months seems to really be quite disappointingly small, considering the patients were already overweight or mildly obese to begin with. Now let's look at high-intensity exercise. One interventional study on obese patients compared high-intensity interval training with moderate-intensity exercise on a treadmill, 3 times a week for 12 weeks, and they matched the energy expenditure between the two exercises. They also combined this with a calorie-restricted diet for both groups. Over the 12 weeks of the study, both groups lost about 6 kilograms, and so high-intensity and moderate-intensity exercise both did identical for weight loss. The high-intensity training did, however, improve fitness more and was more time efficient. Unfortunately, since the study included a calorie-restricted diet, most of this weight loss was probably due to the diet and not the exercise, since as we saw in the previous study, moderate intensity exercise only led to a reduction of around 3 kilos compared to the control, over a much longer time period of 8 months. And so it looks like any endurance exercise is similarly beneficial for losing fat. The higher the intensity of the exercise, the more time efficient it is, and the more it improves fitness. But the loss in fat doesn't seem to be huge for any of them. Lastly, I want to talk about resistance training. Resistance training allows you to build more muscle through lifting weights and progressively increasing the weight as you get stronger. Muscle is metabolically active tissue, and so it's expensive for the body to build and maintain. So by doing resistance training and building more muscle, this can help you lose body fat, and along with the increased muscle will improve your body composition, health, and strength. One study examined the frequency of resistance training in obese women. They randomized participants between 2 groups, one group which trained once a week, and the other which trained 3 times a week over a period of 24 weeks. Both groups had identical workouts, which composed of a 45-minute resistance training, plus a warm-up and cool-down period. The resistance training program included 4 sets of each of 7 exercises for a full-body workout. The group that trained 3 times a week went from 97 kilos to 89 kilos, a loss of 8 kilograms. And the group that trained once a week went from 89 kilos to 84 kilos, a loss of 5 kilograms. But this group also had a lower starting weight, so had less weight to lose. Both groups gained muscle and strength, reducing body fat, improving their body composition, as well as lowering their blood glucose and insulin levels, implying improvements to their metabolic health. Interestingly, resistance training seems to be much more effective than low, moderate, and high-intensity endurance exercises when it comes to losing body fat. Presumably, this is because the resistance training is also causing your body to build more muscle, increasing your calorie requirements, and also improving your metabolic health. And so personally, I would prioritize resistance training in the gym as my main form of exercise to build more muscle and strength, and then combine this with whatever other exercises or sports you like to do. Personally, I like to mix in a lot of walking and sprinting. Now, one thing that's interesting to note is that the calories burnt during exercise are actually surprisingly low. For example, a 30-minute jog only burns around 300 calories, and so the benefits of exercise are thought not just to be from burning calories, but also to be due to the stimulus that the exercise provides to your body. This stimulus in the exercise is essentially a signal to your body to adapt to the exercise, which then produces changes in your overall body composition and also at a cellular level, providing you with health benefits. Now, exercise is important, but you can't outrun a bad diet. And so at number 4, we have eat more protein. Protein is thought to be the most satiating macronutrient compared to fat and carbohydrates. One meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials from 2012 looked at studies comparing a standard protein diet to a high protein diet, with both diets matched in calories. It was found that the higher protein diets led to a larger reduction in body fat, despite identical calorie intakes for both diet groups, and the higher protein diets also resulted in more muscle mass and greater satiety compared to standard protein diets. And so by eating more protein, you will feel fuller and require less carbohydrates and fat in order to feel full. Protein is also very important in muscle recovery and growth, so eating more protein also feeds nicely into our previous tip number 5. Now, keeping with the diet theme, at number 3, we have cutting out grains. One 2014 study looking at Korean adults found that carbohydrate consumption, and particularly refined grain consumption, was associated with metabolic syndrome, which includes obesity and diabetes. Another 2023 study found similarly that refined grains were associated with greater weight gain in midlife. However, both of these are just correlations, and so we can't get too carried away. But lower quality sources of carbohydrates like added sugar and refined grains were more strongly associated with weight gain compared to higher quality sources like fruit and non-starchy vegetables. As we'll see later, low carbohydrate diets are superior to low-fat diets for weight loss, and one of the major sources for carbohydrates in the Western diet are grains, and particularly processed grains. Grains are a relatively new addition to the human diet, only being consumed since the invention of agriculture around 10,000 years ago, which in evolutionary terms is quite a short time period. Grains are rather nutrient deficient, which is why grain-based foods like breakfast cereals are fortified with vitamins and minerals. Grains also contain plant defense chemicals and anti-nutrients like phytic acid that reduce your absorption of certain minerals like zinc, iron, and calcium. And so there's no real benefit to eating them over other foods. And so I would recommend consuming your carbohydrates from higher quality sources like fruits or vegetables. But one source of carbohydrates that is worse than grains is refined sugar. And so at number 2 on the list, we have cutting out refined sugar. Sugar-sweetened beverages are one of the main sources of refined sugar. A 2017 systematic review found that sugar-sweetened and artificially sweetened beverages both have a significant link to obesity. And of course, being refined sugar, it has no other nutritional benefits from consuming it. And now last at number 1, we have cutting out vegetable oils, or industrial seed oils as they're probably better called. Now, I've covered this in a lot more detail in my last video looking at vegetables, so if you want to know more detail, then check that out. But I'll briefly summarize here. These oils are very high in the omega-6 polyunsaturated fat called linoleic acid. Excessive amounts of omega-6 linoleic acid upsets the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Omega-6 and omega-3 fats have opposing effects on satiety and weight gain. And tipping this balance heavily to omega-6 is thought to cause weight gain and overeating. Also, because linoleic acid is a polyunsaturated fat, it is not very stable and can react with oxygen to form toxic oxidation products like aldehydes, including one of the most studied ones called 4-HNE. So consuming high amounts of linoleic acid leads to high amounts of these toxic oxidation products. Together, this means that vegetables are thought to contribute to a wide range of diseases, including obesity, diabetes, heart disease, neurodegenerative diseases, and cancer. And mice that were fed a Western-like diet high in omega-6 were seen to become fatter through the generations, compared to those fed an otherwise identical diet with the same calorie intake but lower omega-6. And so excessive omega-6 consumption likely leads to multiple chronic diseases, including obesity, and this effect gets worse through the generations. Now, these last 3 tips are also all linked together, as together they're the main ingredients in highly processed foods. And so by cutting these 3 out, you cut out virtually all of the highly processed foods. And these 3 foods are also the main differences that are seen between a westernized diet and the more traditional diets like those of modern hunter-gatherers. And we know that when we take people from modern hunter-gatherer tribes and then introduce them to a Western diet and lifestyle, their health declines and they start to get fat. These 3 foods of refined grains, refined sugar, and refined oils are the main changes in their diets. And so by cutting out these 3, it's going to greatly help lose weight. And not just lose the weight, but also keep the weight off without difficult calorie restriction. And this is going to be much more sustainable than calorie restricted diets because a lot of the time people lose weight, quit the diet, and then put the weight straight back on, making it all kind of pointless. Now, I'd like to tie this all together by looking at a really interesting systematic review article. In this large systematic review from 2015, the authors looked at 32 studies that were examining the effects of diet, exercise, or diet and exercise interventions on the body composition and the hormonal and cellular responses of overweight or obese adults. The review found that diet and exercise together was more effective than diet or exercise alone, which won't surprise anyone. But they also compared types of exercises and types of diets. Similar to what we saw earlier, they found that resistance training was more effective than endurance training at reducing body fat and retaining or building muscle at the same time. particularly when the resistance training used compound exercises to engage multiple muscle groups, with the weight chosen so that only 6 to 10 repetitions could be performed per set. They also found that a high protein and fat and low carbohydrate diet was the most effective, producing the largest improvements in body composition and having higher satiety than other diets. Combining this with resistance training produced the biggest improvements. They define a high protein diet as having more than 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And of course, for a diet to be low carbohydrate, you must remove some of the high carbohydrate foods. And in a Western diet, we get most of our carbohydrates from grains and refined sugar. So the most effective interventions for weight loss removed or reduced grains and refined sugar, and therefore processed foods as well, and also increased protein, and combined these with exercise, particularly resistance training. Okay, so there's my 5 most important tips for weight loss from looking at the studies. And the optimal diets for weight loss are those that are low carbohydrate and higher in fat and protein. And so this is my first bonus tip to try a low carbohydrate diet. We can also see that what the modern evidence says is very different from the conventional advice for weight loss, which is a low fat, high carbohydrate, calorie restricted diet with long sessions of moderate endurance exercise to try to burn calories. But of course, the high carbohydrate, high processed food diet is what is causing the weight gain in the first place. And so trying to lose weight by pure willpower, by keeping the same bad diet but eating less of it, and doing long endurance exercise sessions, is clearly going to fail, as it doesn't address the root cause of the problem, which is the original diet. Now, if you look at a lot of modern weight loss diets, you have diets like low-carb diets, very low-carb ketogenic diets, carnivore diets, paleo diets, and so on. But what all of these diets have in common is these 5 tips. They all remove refined carbohydrates from grains and sugars, excessive polyunsaturated fat from refined seed oils, are high in protein compared to the average diet, and are normally combined with exercise. Now, I've got 2 more bonus tips for you. The first bonus I have for you is to try intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting may not be for everyone, but intermittent fasting can include alternate day fasting, where you eat every other day, or time-restricted eating, where you eat in only a small window of time every day. And so you might only eat, for example, in a 6-hour window in the evening. A 2022 review article found that intermittent fasting produces mild to moderate weight loss, on par with that achieved by traditional calorie-restricted diets. And so is well worth trying on top of exercise and dietary changes to help increase your weight loss. Now, my last tip is likely an unexpected one, and that is to get more sun exposure. A study on mice looked at the effects of ultraviolet radiation on weight gain in mice fed an obesity-inducing diet. Those mice that were exposed to ultraviolet light gained less weight than those mice that were not exposed to UV, and this effect was seen not to be due to vitamin D. Another study in humans looked at weight loss in obese subjects. Patients were assigned to 2 groups, one that did moderate exercise and one that did moderate exercise combined with bright light therapy in the morning, over a 6-week period. Both groups did the same exercise, which was 20 minutes of moderate exercise on a bike. The bright visible light therapy group saw a reduction in body fat, dropping their body fat by 2%, whereas the exercise-only group saw a small increase of around 0.5% in their body fat. And so there's reason to believe that sunlight could also help you with weight loss. Now, that's all the weight loss tips that I've got for you today. So if you liked the video and you learned something new, then do the usual YouTube stuff of liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. And if you want to support the channel for more content like this, then you can do so via PayPal or Buy Me a Coffee, which will be linked in the description below.